Michael Carter hadn't slept more than 4 hours in 3 years. Not because he didn't want to. Not because he was busy, chasing some corporate dream or staying out late with friends. He didn't sleep because the apartment was old, the walls were thin, and every time the radiator clicked off at 2 in the morning, his 6-year-old daughter Emma would wake up scared and call for him. And every single time, without fail, he would get up, walk across the cold floor in his socks, sit beside her bed, and hold her hand until she fell back asleep. Then he'd go back to his own bed and stare at the ceiling until his alarm went off at 5. That was his life, and he wouldn't trade it for anything. Emma was everything. She had her mother's eyes, wide, brown and honest, and she had a habit of tilting her head slightly to the left whenever she was thinking hard about something. She did it when she was trying to remember the name of a cartoon character. She did it when she was doing her homework. She did it the morning she looked up at Michael over her cereal bowl and said, completely out of nowhere, "Daddy?" My teacher asked us who our hero is. Michael looked up from the coffee he was barely managing to pour. "Oh yeah, what did you say?" Emma tilted her head. "I said you." He didn't say anything for a moment. He set the coffee pot down slowly. "You told your whole class that?" he asked. "Yep." She went back to eating her cereal like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Miss Patterson said we had to explain why. So I said, because you wake up every day, even when you're tired, and you make my lunch. Even when there's not a lot of food and you never leave. Michael turned toward the kitchen window so she wouldn't see his face. He never left. That was what she said. That was her definition of a hero. He thought about what that actually meant. He thought about the night her mother, Dana, packed 2 bags and walked out the door when Emma was 3 years old. No warning, no big fight, just a note on the kitchen counter that said she wasn't built for this and she was sorry. Michael had stood in the kitchen holding that note for 20 minutes before Emma woke up from her nap and started calling for him. He folded the note, put it in his jacket pocket, and went to get her. He never read it again. A week later, he burned it in the parking lot of his apartment complex because he didn't want Emma to ever find it. He worked as a maintenance supervisor at a mid-size office building in downtown Chicago. It wasn't glamorous. He wore a gray uniform, with his name stitched above the pocket, and he fixed broken things all day. Leaking pipes, faulty elevators, malfunctioning HVAC systems. He was good at it. His crew respected him. His boss, a tired man named Gerald, told him every 6 months that he was the most reliable person in the building. But reliable didn't pay more than $38,000 a year. And in Chicago, that meant every single month was a calculation. Rent, groceries, Emma's school supplies, Emma's winter coat, Emma's field trip permission slips with the $15 fees attached. He had a notebook in his kitchen drawer where he tracked every expense by hand. Not on an app, a notebook. Because somehow writing it down made him feel more in control. There were weeks when he ate peanut butter sandwiches for lunch every day so Emma could have the better food. There were months when he skipped his own doctor appointments because the copay wasn't something he could fit in. There was one December, 2 years ago, when he sold his guitar, the one thing he'd kept from before. His life became entirely about survival, and so he could buy Emma the art kit she'd circled 3 times in the toy catalog. She still used it. Every weekend she'd sit at the kitchen table and draw pictures. Most of them were of the 2 of them. Stick figures holding hands in front of their apartment building. He framed one of them. It hung above the television. Now Emma was 6, and she had stood up in front of her first-grade class and called him a hero. Michael didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a man who was running on empty and had forgotten what it felt like to have a full tank. He felt like someone who had become so good at managing crisis that he'd stopped recognizing it as crisis and started calling it normal. He felt, if he was being completely honest, in the quiet dark of 3 in the morning, when Emma was finally asleep, profoundly alone. Not lonely in the way people casually mean it. Alone in the deep structural way, like a load-bearing wall with cracks in it. Still holding everything up, but not sure for how long. The day everything changed started like every other day. Michael was in the building's lower level, working on a water pressure issue, near the executive elevator when the doors opened and a man stepped out who clearly wasn't supposed to be in the lower level. He was in his 60s. Expensive suit, silver hair, the kind of posture that comes from decades of being the most important person in every room. Michael recognized him immediately. James Whitfield. The building's primary tenant occupied the top 4 floors. Whitfield Capital, one of the most well-known private equity firms in the Midwest. James Whitfield had been on the cover of Forbes twice. "You lost?" Michael asked, not unkindly, wiping his hands on a rag. Whitfield looked around the basement like he'd never seen a building's infrastructure before, which he probably hadn't. "My phone died. I took the wrong elevator. I have a call in 7 minutes." He looked at Michael's uniform, then at Michael's face. "Is there a phone I can use?" Michael handed him his own cell phone without hesitation. Whitfield looked surprised. He took it, made his call, spoke for 4 minutes in the clipped, confident language of men who move money around in large quantities, then handed the phone back. "Thank you," he said. Then, because something about the ease of the gesture seemed to catch him off guard, he added, "What's your name?" "Michael Carter." "How long have you worked here, Michael?" 6 years. Whitfield nodded slowly. He didn't leave right away. He looked at the work Michael had been doing, the pipe diagram taped to the wall, the tools laid out in a precise line, the notebook where Michael kept his maintenance logs. "You always this organized?" "I have a 6-year-old at home," Michael said. "You learn to be organized or you drown." Something shifted in Whitfield's expression. "Single parent." Michael looked at him evenly. "Yes." "Mother around?" "No." Whitfield was quiet for a moment. Then he said something unexpected. "My son is raising his daughter alone, has been for 2 years. I watch him some days and I think, I don't know how he does it. I genuinely don't know." He paused. "I didn't know how to help him." "Still don't really?" Michael didn't say anything. He picked up a wrench and turned back to the pipe. "How do you do it?" Whitfield asked. The question was so direct and so unguarded that it didn't sound like something a billionaire was supposed to ask a maintenance worker in a basement. It sounded like something a father asks another father. Michael was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "My daughter told her class I'm her hero. She said it's because I wake up every day even when I'm tired and I never leave." He set the wrench down. "I'm not a hero. I'm just a guy who's scared that if he stops moving, everything falls apart. But she thinks I'm a hero. So I get up." He picked the wrench back up. "That's it. That's the whole answer." Whitfield stood very still. Michael didn't look at him. He went back to work. He didn't think about the conversation again that day. He picked Emma up from the after-school program at 5:15, made pasta for dinner, helped her with a worksheet about animals that live in the ocean, gave her a bath, read her 2 chapters of a book about a girl who discovers a dragon living under her porch, and turned her light off at 8:30. Then he sat at the kitchen table with his notebook and moved numbers around until he figured out how to handle the fact that the car needed an oil change and Emma's sneakers were getting too small, and both of those things needed to happen before the end of the month. He went to bed at 11. Emma woke up at 2:15 when the radiator clicked off. He held her hand until she fell back asleep. 3 weeks later, Gerald called Michael into his office with a strange look on his face and told him that he'd received a call from the HR department of Whitfield Capital. They were looking to hire a director of facilities, operations for all 6 of their Midwest properties. It was a management position. The salary they'd quoted to Gerald, who relayed it with visible discomfort, was $94,000 a year, plus benefits, plus a relocation package if needed. They had asked for Michael by name. Michael sat in the chair across from Gerald and didn't say anything for a long time. "That's a real offer?" he finally said. "They sent it in writing," Gerald said. "You know somebody up there?" Michael thought about a man in an expensive suit who asked him how he did it in a basement surrounded by pipes. "I lent him my phone," Michael said. He almost didn't call back. Not because he didn't want it. He wanted it desperately, the way a man dying of thirst wants water. But because wanting something that big felt dangerous after years of teaching himself not to want things he couldn't afford. He sat with the number written on a piece of paper on his kitchen table for 2 days. Emma drew a picture of a butterfly on the back of it because she didn't know what it was. He called on a Thursday morning. The interview was unlike any he'd ever had. He met with 3 people from Whitfield Capital's operations team, answered questions about logistics and team management and crisis response. And then, at the end, James Whitfield himself walked into the room, shook Michael's hand and sat down. "I told them about you," Whitfield said simply. I told them what you told me. I said, this is the person I want running our properties, someone who understands that you don't stop. You just don't stop. He folded his hands on the table. My son needed to hear what you said. I called him that night and I told him. He called me back crying. Whitfield's voice was measured, but something underneath it was not. I've given him money his whole life. I've given him everything I thought a father was supposed to give, and somehow a stranger in a basement gave him something I never could. Michael looked at the table for a moment. What did it give him? He asked quietly. A reason that was enough, Whitfield said. You don't do it because it's easy. You don't do it because you're not scared. You do it because someone small thinks you're a hero, and you refuse to prove them wrong. He paused. That's not maintenance work, Michael. That's leadership. Michael started the job on the 1st of the following month. The night before his first day, he sat on the edge of Emma's bed after she'd fallen asleep. The apartment was quiet. The radiator was still. He looked at her face in the dark, the way her eyelashes rested against her cheeks, the way her hand was curled loosely near her chin, and he felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Not relief, not excitement, something older and quieter than both of those things. He felt like the cracks in the wall were being filled, slowly, from the outside in. He thought about Dana's note, the one he'd burned in the parking lot. He had never been angry about it the way people assumed he must be. He had been devastated, and then he had been a father, and somewhere in the transition, between those two things, he had stopped being the man he was before and become something else, something that didn't have a clean name, just a person who got up, just a person who stayed. Emma stirred slightly, and without waking up, she reached out and grabbed his hand. He sat there holding it for a long time. In the morning, he made her breakfast, packed her lunch, walked her to the school door, and watched her go in. Right before she disappeared inside, she turned around and gave him the kind of wave that only a 6-year-old can give, her whole arm moving, completely unself-conscious. Like waving at the most important person in the world is simply the natural thing to do, because to her it was. He waved back. Then he straightened his jacket. A new one, not a gray uniform. A real jacket. And he walked toward the rest of his life.